Hi, so in this video we're going to learn about direct quotations, how and when to use them, the difference between shorter and longer quotations, and how to make changes to them if necessary, and also some critical thinking about how often you should be using direct quotes in a piece of work. So, direct quotations are the word-for-word integration of other people's work into your own work, such as this quotation here from Lakoff and Johnson: "Metaphor is pervasive in everyday life," which has been integrated into the sentence, "Lakoff and Johnson argue that metaphor is pervasive in everyday life." Quotations are usually marked with quotation marks, either single or double, depending on the referencing style you are required to use. And of course, they are also always accompanied by a citation, referring to the original source. In this example, the citation is given in the Harvard referencing system with the year and page number of the quotation in brackets. Note that the absence of quotation marks would be considered a form of plagiarism. Even if the source is still acknowledged with a reference, no quotation marks implies that these are your own words, when they are clearly not. So, the second version of the example given here, without quotation marks, would not be acceptable. If you're using a longer quotation, then it is usually formatted as a block quotation set off from the rest of the text, as shown in the example here. The whole quotation is indented on the left, there is a gap above and below the quotation, and there are no quotation marks. Unlike with shorter quotations, the quotation marks aren't necessary here because the formatting with the indent and the gaps already identifies this as a quotation. The cutoff point between what counts as a longer quotation can differ from one referencing style to another. One common rule is that any quotation that is longer than 40 words should be formatted as a block citation, but make sure you check the guidance for your referencing style so you know which rule to follow. So, now let's look in more detail at how you can effectively incorporate quotations in your work. Firstly, it is important to make sure that your direct quotations make sense in context. They must fit in with the grammar of the surrounding sentence so that there's no clash between your part of the sentence and the quotation itself. Here, for example, the start of the sentence, "Lakoff and Johnson argue that," naturally flows into the quotation, "Metaphor is pervasive in everyday life," and forms one grammatical sentence. Okay, so make sure there's no clash in grammar. Next, it is vital that you don't change any of the contextual meaning of the original quotation. If we look at the example here, the original from Tomasello's book on the origins of human communication states that the current hypothesis is that human cooperative communication emerged as part and parcel of the evolution of humans' unique forms of collaborative activity. The original clearly states that this is just a hypothesis. It isn't a proven fact. As a result, this can then not be quoted as given here with "as shown by Tomasello," which expresses a lot more certainty. Instead, we'd have to write something like "as hypothesized, as proposed, suggested by Tomasello," in order to truly maintain the meaning of the quotation. With that in mind, it is, however, possible to make some changes to a direct quotation, but any changes made need to be marked with square brackets. For example, you are allowed, within reason, and as long as it doesn't change the meaning of the original, of course, you are allowed to omit part of the quotation. For example, Johnson explains that in academic writing, and then we've got an ellipsis where something from the original has been omitted, marked with square brackets and 3 dots before the quotation continues with, "References must always be given for any material used." Note that the bits that now conjoin in academic writing and "references must always be given" fit together grammatically, so again, there's no clash in grammar. Also, note that there is no need to add an ellipsis at the beginning or the end of a quotation. The quotation marks already identify that this has been taken out of context and that something might have appeared before or after the quotation. Sometimes it might also be necessary to make a change to a pronoun. If we look at the earlier example of a block citation from Lakoff and Johnson, we can see that the two instances of the pronoun they, here highlighted in yellow, have been given in square brackets. That's because in the original it said we rather than they. But of course, out of context, we means something different. It doesn't really refer to Lakoff and Johnson anymore, but rather to the author or authors of the current essay. So a change to they is necessary, so the pronoun still refers to Lakoff and Johnson. Okay, now that you know how to use direct quotations, let's also briefly talk about when to use them. Because direct quotations are not your own words, they do not really contribute to your own academic voice coming through. Because they are not your own words, if you overuse them, your essay will merely be a patchwork of other people's words with only a little contribution of your own. That doesn't mean, of course, that you can't or should not ever use direct quotations at all. They are handy, for example, when the original author has already put it very eloquently or beautifully, and you don't want to mess with it. Or when you are using someone else's definition for a key concept, or indeed, when you are giving a central quotation that you then want to analyze and comment on in detail. But there's another problem with direct quotations. They also do not inherently show that you as a writer have understood their content. All you've shown is that you know how to copy-paste words from one document into another, which is why it's important that when you do use direct quotations, you always elaborate on them or engage with them so that your own voice still comes through and the direct quotation is anchored in your argument. Finally, it's also important to know that the number of direct quotations you are encouraged to use differs from one discipline to another. Some disciplines prefer you to limit your use of direct quotations and instead make more use of paraphrasing and summarizing, thus promoting your own academic voice. Other disciplines, on the other hand, while also encouraging you to paraphrase and summarize scholarly material, also stress the importance of direct quotations to provide evidence. For example, in literature studies, direct quotations from the novel, poem, or play you're analyzing are necessary to provide evidence for your analysis. So, again, make sure you know how and when to use direct quotations in your specific discipline of study. So, to sum up, remember that direct quotations should be used with care, making sure that you don't overuse them. And if you do use them, give a citation and engage with the quotation to show your voice. Make sure that you don't make any changes to the original meaning of the quotation and do mark any changes that are necessary with square brackets.